Welcome back to the Lords of Lore podcast. I'm Matt.
I'm Luka.
And we are doing an episode of Ruminations, wherein Luka and I sit down and review a book. And this month, we are doing Nine Tails by Leigh Bardugo. Again, I'm going to say this at the top so there's no confusion. This is a spoiler-heavy review. If you haven't read the book and you don't want it to be spoiled before you do, you should come back after you have read the book. If you don't care about that, keep listening. And also like the video. That helps out a lot. And if you're listening on podcast, hello, how are you? Give us a review or something. Check out our Instagram channel page, our Twitter page, and you can even find us on TikTok if you want some small segments and sometimes things you might not see on the regular episodes. What? Yeah, check it out. Anyways, let's dive into Nine Tails. So obviously by Leigh Bardugo. I'll also mention the art behind us is by Irina Plakova or Phantom Rim on Artspace. They have a lot of really cool renditions of this main character, Galaxy Stern or Alex Stern, as they prefer. And we just finished our spoiler-free review. So if that interests you more than this one, you can check that one out. But in that review, I stated that I really enjoyed this book, even though I was super hesitant after reading the synopsis, after going in pretty cold, pretty blind for the both of us. On this show, Ruminations, one of us will recommend a book to the other. We'll come back here and discuss that book. And this is one that you hadn't read before, but you really enjoyed the cover, which is like a three-dimensional snake coming out. So we both went into it pretty blind. But I surprisingly enjoyed it, even though this sort of low fantasy set within the real world doesn't usually appeal to me. I still really ended up enjoying this book. You enjoyed it, but not so much. What were your feelings?
It's like it feels bad to say didn't enjoy that. It's like I didn't think it was good because I thought it was very good. I thought it was very well written. I thought the characters were excellent, like some of the best character work in like fantasy that I've seen, like genuinely. Very relatable, very real characters. Even like Stephen King had a review of this book saying it's one of the best fantasy books he's read in years. And like, yeah, I would agree with that in terms of writing. It's missing those elements of high fantasy that are like, that's the stuff, like that's what I want. But
those are like very important to your enjoyment of fantasy.
Exactly.
Big swords guy.
Yeah, like
me too.
Exactly. Like I love the world building of a brand new world and culture and the like the magic, again, swords. Like I love swords.
Yeah.
But like I can't say this was a bad book. It was definitely not it was an excellent book. It like sometimes it did lean a bit heavy into the very how do you like the salt of the earth of humanity, like just garbage people, and it just there's like difficult passages to get through, especially like Alex's backstory. Like once you get to that, like it was just very unpleasant to read. And then like for me, what I happened to feel was like that combination of that like unpleasantness with the fact that there's no like those elements that I love kind of put together sort of diminished my enjoyment of the book as a whole. And that's why I said like I'm not like I can't wait for like a sequel type thing. I'm not like I didn't even look up if there is a sequel announced or anything.
There is. I don't know if it's been announced, but the author, I listened to an interview that was part of the audiobook. And she said that there is a sequel coming out. I'm not sure what the timeline is because she's very busy, as I've found out. But and the name of said sequel exists somewhere in the final chapter of the book. So my guess was Gentleman Demon or something. So
okay, yeah, that would make sense.
Yeah. And so I guess it would spoilers for the last chapter of the book. I'm sure it would have to take place with the adventure our characters are seemingly going on into the afterlife to recover their friend.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with anything you've said. This book did not feel like escapism for me at all, because again, it takes place in the real world. And a lot of the themes they deal with are things that, we as human beings in this society would deal with. Things like murder, assault of various types. And so it's heavy in that regard to read. But for me, I found recently like this type of book might have a wider appeal than the sort of high fantasy you and I are used to.
Totally.
Yeah. And so like I've actually like recommended this book to multiple people because I know like the barrier for entry is a little bit lower than that of like if I was recommending Rage of Dragons, which I have done and do often, it's tougher. Like I gotta know the person I'm recommending it to, like to have that buy-in. Whereas this one, it's like I think it's interesting enough where someone would be like, "Huh, that sounds like something I might be into." And because it takes the form of like a murder mystery, who done it type of thing, I think that sort of kept me intrigued enough where I didn't back out because I was like, oh, it's just like someone going to school. But the fantasy elements of it, and they do come on like very quickly into the novel when we're dealing with I think it's called a prognostication. Creepy, terrifying.
Yeah, super gross.
But also like again, going back to like that conspiracy Illuminati culture of like the early 2000s, it was very much like reminded me of like, oh yeah, secret societies and lizard people and like doing things behind the scenes. But it felt so grounded that it was like I wouldn't be that shocked if these things were real. Some of the other houses, I think that's Skull and Bones who does that. Some of the other houses and the magic system they sort of use was a little bit far-fetched.
Yeah, like the portals and
the portal magic and like the spell bound documents or contracts, I think is manuscript, I believe. Does that manuscript one. But all these houses had really cool things, and I think the magic system was cool because it like set up the rules like, no, you can't just do like whatever you want. There's sort of, you have to do it on these days and it's got to take place under this moon and blah, 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 which I appreciate because as we both know, you and I are pretty big magic system guys. So I love that it wasn't just like, I feel like I've been rewatching the Harry Potter movies, and I won't speak to that author because they're an awful person, but some of the magic system set up in there is bogus. It's just,
I mean, it doesn't really have, it's like super soft, like
super soft. But then like also contradicts itself, which like even if you're a soft system, like I don't know, whatever. I'm not gonna get into magic systems here, but it's a little bit frustrating when the magic system doesn't follow its own rules, because then you're sort of out of the loop. And I feel like when I'm reading something, I very much want to understand the world that's working, especially if it takes place in our own world. So I was very much appreciative of that in this book. Things like death words, so fucking cool. Not just like death or dead, but these poems that reference, metaphorically reference death and taking on new passages in life. I thought was like a super cool way. Obviously like our main character, and I think podcast listeners are sick of me saying this, but I pitch this as Euphoria meets The Sixth Sense because Euphoria and all the troubled aspects or things that Alex has to deal with, the situation she was in before the start of this story takes place. And then The Sixth Sense is she could literally see ghosts, and that's a big part of her life and interact with them. Which I thought was really cool. What were your initial thoughts to discovering like her sort of power set?
I thought it was interesting. Like, I have to say, necromancy, ghosts, and that whole like area of magic is usually not my favorite. So even that sort of took me out of it just a little bit, just because there's not much there that like just draws my interest a lot. But the way it was done here was so interesting, and like just slowly unraveling it. And then like obviously the part it plays in her development is massive. And just like the various like layers of her character like being shown through the lens of like her ability, and how like we slowly also discover what her ability is. I thought it was like really interesting. And gives like a unique perspective, especially like in a murder mystery kind of story. Like it's a very unique point of view for a character to have, like being able to see ghosts and like having just that perspective towards that. I thought it was like a very, how to say, like a almost like a useful character for the author, and then just a very interesting lens for us.
Yeah, well said. I like at first I was with you, like and again I think to no effect of the book at all, but you and I both came in very hesitantly, and so I was looking for every reason initially, subconsciously, to be like, oh, come on.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, tattooed girls, you can see ghosts. Oh, it's how edgy. But then, like, as it sort of unraveled itself, I was like, I love this. It's so fucking cool. And then I love, like, the reveal of her power, or its origin, or not so much a reveal, but, you know, at one point, Darlington, one of the other main characters, asks her, like, when was the first time you realized you could see them? Or when was the first time you saw them? But it was more, the question should have been, when did you realize they weren't alive? Because for her as a child, she didn't. They were just weird people that she would always see, and, you know, other people wouldn't see them. It wasn't until like later in life that she realized like they weren't actually there, or she wasn't supposed to see them, which I thought was very tragic. And the way she described people wasn't like, oh, it was a ghostly being. It was like, oh, it was a small boy with his head caved in who hung out beneath the diving board. It was like, oh, what the fuck? Like, you could imagine a child seeing that and not being able to comprehend or like make sense of it. So all the things that sort of happened to her, obviously, I'll just briefly touch on it because I don't issue a trigger warning for sexual assault, which may come up later in this discussion as well. But when she has like her first period, and blood obviously being one of the things that attracts Grey's ghosts to people and sort of weakens the veil between the afterlife and the, you know, our lives, comes through and, you know, tries to assault her, but no one else can see this is happening. So she's being written off as someone who has mental health issues or some sort of psychosis, which, and as a youth, and no one really believes what she's saying when she tells them. She feels like she can't tell people because they'll think she's, you know, making it up, or you know, having an episode or something like that. So I thought that was very sad. You combine like a very alienating time of a young woman's life with this ability she has, which is already alienating in itself, and combining those two things together, just like really, really sad and upsetting to read. Because it's like, you know, I think a lot of the trauma she goes through in this book is metaphorical to what young women in real life deal with. You know, if we look at seeing ghosts and people not believing what she can see or what she can do, as, you know, people just not believing women flat out with anything, it's tragic. It's sad to like see this as like a manifestation of that. So again, like there was very heavy themes in this book that I thought the author did a very good job at like sort of playing into the magic system a little bit. Thoughts on that sort of reveal?
Horrifying. Like, and that also continues in other aspects of it, where she, like, through this lens of the fantasy world, like talks about real legitimate cultural issues, like the way she shows like the culture of the university, like the society of the university. And like there's that character, what's his name with the B, another, like the other major like sexual assault that happens in the
it's book. Like Bryce or something. He's absolute tool. Not Lance, but I can't remember his name. The lacrosse player. I want to say Bailey for some reason, but it's not. Like that is like a one instance that is metaphorical for
these types of things happening at university campuses all over the country and in our country too. Like, and you read about them, and like when you're in school, you hear about them. And the way that they're handled is like very similar to how it's done in the book. And like the fact that these societies are portrayed in the way they really would be in real life is like, again, very good writing and very good way of like addressing real world issues through the story.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, that was like this, maybe the strongest point of this book was how real it felt.
Right. Yeah. It's almost like the fantasy aspect of the story was a sort of pardon the pun, but like a veil over, to sort of make it easier to address these real world issues, which I think all fantasy is. But in high fantasy, again, there's that level of escapism, whereas we can look at things and awful society and awful, societal structure in those stories as something separate from ours, and see them and apply those same principles onto our own society. Whereas this is very much this is how our world works. And this is how our world works if there was a theoretical magic system, but it wouldn't change the way our world works.
Yeah, it doesn't change like how the world developed and how culture developed and how people actually act.
Yeah. And it doesn't excuse them as magic either. I hope that much is clear, but it sort of highlights how absurd these things are, is when you add a level of magic to them that they don't change at all. It just, highlights how absurd things happen in our world that we haven't found the correct way to handle thus far. The character's name was Blake Keeley. Absolute tool. Works his way into the murder mystery. He's getting a drug called Merity, which makes people I don't know what the obedient is, probably not
it's
harsh enough.
Compulsion,
it makes somebody want to serve you, basically. Basically, not basically, 100% sexually assaults the roommate of our main character, and which is awful, bar none. It's a terrible thing, but the way she gets revenge on Blake Keeley is one of the most, reading it was one of the most cathartic sort of things. Uses the same drug on him and makes him eat his own excrement. And films it. And it was cool how manuscript came back and played a part in sort of erasing not the assault that happened or the memory of the assault for the victim, but erasing everybody else's awareness that it had happened. Because again, going back to real world things, it's not only bad that the assault happened, but now that everyone's aware of it, it's two crushing things on top of each other for the woman, Mercy, the roommate. So at least Alex can take one of those things away via this magic system. And then, getting even with, not even, but getting back at Blake Keeley for fucking, it's just so good. He comes up later in the story. He doesn't learn his lesson. So it's tough, but very cool in the way that the magic system's used to sort of this character who's very much coming into this world of magic and being like, okay, well, I'm going to use this for what I see fit, not necessarily operate under the rule set of these houses and societies. So the sort of murder mystery, it gets a bit complicated. So I don't know if we'll dive deep into all the sort of plot twists with that. I enjoyed it. Up until there are some moments I want to get to, but I first want to talk about the end of the book and the plot twist that happens there. I'm curious as to what your thoughts were on Professor Bellbaum.
I honestly have no strong feelings about how she the very end when she tries to kill our main character. I thought that was a cool use of her power where she draws the other spirits out of her to save herself essentially. And there was like, and there's two murder mysteries happening in this during the whole time. Like there's the one that happens in the 1800s. And
like, well, there could even be three because there's the bridegroom and who killed his wife.
Yeah.
Then Darlington and who summoned the mouth portal or whatever to kill him. And then the death of Tara Hutchins. Or yeah, well, it's up in the air, I guess. But
and then Tara, yeah.
And then the Tara Hutchins murder, which is, I think, at the forefront, but these other two sort of come up in relation to it. But more so, like, what was your thoughts on the reveal that Bellbaum was responsible or was the type of being she was?
I thought it was cool. Like, I didn't trying to remember exactly.
Like, so there was the confrontation where like Alex goes to the dean.
Yeah, to like confront him with the fact that he's the one who had Tara killed. And
yeah.
Yeah.
So, and then in that conversation, it gets interrupted by this, French professor who comes in and then reveals that she's actually the bridegroom's wife.
Right. Right. And then she's been consuming people to stay alive all this time. Right. Yeah. I thought that was like a cool, again, I don't know how, like, I don't love the magic that uses like the human soul, like the necromancy and stuff, but I thought it was an interesting way that she's been like constantly consuming people in New Haven, and she's been creating all the nexuses that have been like founding the houses. I thought that was interesting. Like, yeah, I mean, it was, I did not see it coming at all. Like the whole time I was like, oh man, this dean. But like as a creature, I thought she was like a cool monster.
Yeah.
Monster spirit. I don't even know what to call her because she's like technically
a wheel walker.
Right. Wheel walker. And then there's like could Alex sort of follow that same path if she wanted to? Like, I guess that is like one thing that I'm curious about for the next one is like, what will be their adventure into hell? Did they call it hell?
In the last chapter, it says who's ready to go to hell, but there's many different names for it. Just tangent here. One part I loved is when she goes into like this borderlands. And she was like, so it was the ancient Egyptians who got the afterlife right. And Dawes is like, no, like, we don't know. This is just like, I don't know. It's weird. This is one interpretation. Don't think about it too much. Type of thing. Yeah. But yeah, the Bellbaum thing threw me off. And obviously I did the audiobook, so Bellbaum has like this very distinct,
have the accent.
Yeah, very distinct French accent. And in the only way sets herself up as a villain as she calls Alex Alexandra, which isn't her name. Her name is Galaxy. They set that up early in the book, and I was like, man, I hate that. Like, what a dick. You don't even know your student's name. And there was always just that one thing about her. I just like, I don't really like this woman. And then so like the vindication of being like, oh, she's the bad guy. It's like, cool. Yeah, it threw me off. But yeah, in the audiobook, she goes from like this French accent to like this, I don't even know what to call it. Early American sort of Southern accent. And like the switch happens like very quickly. And I was like, what the fuck? And she's like talking to the bridegroom in like her old like Southern Belle accent, It was pretty cool, like to hear the change happen. Which again is like one of the reasons I really love audiobooks, because those sort of details I might not think of while I'm reading the book.
Yeah. Dude, I totally didn't like.
Yeah. So yeah, that was cool. And then her explanation of like, first we think it's the dean, but his plan didn't succeed, so it's a little bit iffy. And then we find out what is creating all these nexuses under these houses and stuff. And so I thought that was a cool reveal, and definitely sets up Alex's character to go on like a further journey and expand on her own power set, being one of these wheel walkers. But all we've seen is one other one, so you got to wonder if there's other ones out in the world who are not evil or
I mean, I think it's explained in the way that like for some reason in New Haven, like in the entire world, like that's where the veil is thinnest.
Yeah.
Like I for some reason I remember reading that. Like I don't know if they talked about it, if it was explained, but like I was always wondering, like, why here? Like, why is Yale got like all these powerful houses? Like, is this? But I'm pretty sure that somewhere it was mentioned that like the veil is thinnest in the world around New Haven for some reason.
Oh, okay. Right. Yeah, I think I can't remember if they said there was more than one spot that had that same quality, but yeah, definitely this spot being one, if not the one that was, lent itself to these nexuses. Yeah, and then even the reveal of like the bridegroom didn't kill his wife.
Yeah,
he got like a spirit possessed him to do it, type of thing. It was very
and
cool.
He got possessed by the spirit his wife was summoning, like the
yeah. So like his wife got possessed by a spirit and then threw it into him,
right.
which made him kill her and himself. And then she flung her own spirit into
the nearest living being, which was like her housekeeper.
Yeah. And so the story goes like the housekeeper ran off screaming and like never spoke about it again. But she's been living in that body since and just consuming people, which, I think give her like 10 years or so. But then one time she consumed a wheel walker that let her live for like 50 additional years.
Yeah.
So that's why she has the interest in Alex. It's her ultimate goal to consume Alex and, prolong her own life. It's really messed up.
Yes. Very fun powers in this book. Like they're all so honestly, I'd want to be what's the weather making school like that?
Oh yeah. I can't remember what they're called. St. Elmo's.
Yeah, like digging in human entrails to like tell the future.
I think that's Skull and Bones who do the prognostications. Yep. That was terrifying, and the fact that they do it to
sew the person back up and send them back.
Yeah, they do it to people who are like have mental health issues or like some sort of psychosis, so that no one believes them. Oh, it's just terrible, and that part alone feels like something the upper class of human society would do. Then there's like Wolf's Head, who are like just shapeshifters.
Yeah.
I love like the one-off stories Darlington gives that are like, yeah, and this year or that year, this bad thing happened. And you're like, oh shit. And then they're like, but they covered it up because they're extremely rich. Like one year, a girl turned into a tiger and never stopped believing she was a tiger. And it's basically like, yeah, when you transform like shapeshift, you keep your own intelligence, a la like D&D or like a druid or something. It's like, yeah, this girl just straight up thought she was a tiger and still does to this day. Her parents have to like keep her caged and stuff. It's so sad.
It's not funny at all.
No.
Remember that movie Tusk?
Yeah. Something like that.
I love Darlington. He was my favorite character.
Darlington was cool, but he was like also represented like this. When you find out more about him, less so, but at first a very like privileged, like know-it-all type of character. But then when you find out like his origin,
his story,
it didn't really take away from the privilege, but it definitely made him a more
sympathetic character, though.
Exactly. That I'm struggling to remember, but that story of him seeing the old Ferris wheel, or like somebody he's with sees the old Ferris wheel across, and then he like finds a newspaper article that says there used to be one there, and that's sort of his initial hint that there is a world beyond the world he knows, and the world he was promised, as he says. There's a few moments I wanted to talk about specifically. So all chapter 12 is about it's when Alex actually goes into the Borderlands. It's my favorite chapter in the book because it starts and finishes with this this sort of like a deal, like the rules to engagement of a contract or to an agreement. And it starts with Alex referencing like when she used to have to deal drugs for her boyfriend, and when she was short, like what she would have to do. But all sort of drug dealing was based off credit. Says, I think is the word she uses. And so she brings this idol back to this house that asked for it in exchange for a favor. And Salome, the girl at that house, is like, sorry, I can't do it. Mm-hmm. And she beats the shit out of her because she's like, that's not how the world works. You're not going to cross me. I did a thing for you. You do a thing for me. Which I thought was like it was just awesome to like these privileged people often show up in this book. And it's Alex who comes from this life of not privileged at all, where she's like, yeah, fuck that. Like, yeah, I'm not going to let you get one off of me. Mm-hmm. You can try that with your other friends, but not me. Which is super cool. But then that sort of agreement goes down to like when she makes the agreement with the bridegroom to investigate his wife's murder in exchange for finding Tara Hutchins beyond the veil for questioning. I loved how it was like, you know, you have to hold up your end of the bargain, no matter if we're talking about drugs or we're talking about like life and death type of thing. Very cool. I love the way that chapter is set up. And then just the visual of like the afterlife in the borderlands, I thought was super cool. What was your interpretation on that sort of scene?
No, especially when you mentioned bargaining, because like that same concept comes back to later when she is attacked and then she's hiding out in, I forgot what their other safe house is called. And she's like ignoring the bridegroom or North for like whatever, how many weeks she's there. And then when she gets out, he like forcibly possesses her. It's like a sort of reverse of that. Like you also made a deal, like,
right.
Like, and then he like, he gives her the dates at that point, I think, like, to investigate. Like that was like a cool, like mirroring of those bargains.
Right.
But yeah, the Borderlands scenes were like super cool. Like that's where like the fantasy elements were coming in, and that's where I was like, okay, like I'm in this now. Like this is much more my speed. Like this is what I was hoping for more of. That's why I'm like, that's like the one thing that about the sequel that excites me is like I want to see like, the true hell. I want to see what the demons like are like, and what Darlington's deal is now that he might be one.
Right. Yeah. No. Same thing. Like knowing that the book might take place solely in a different world or a world just beyond our world is way more intriguing to me than going back to Yale for another year. I don't know if I would be as sold on that, but as so far I am interested at least in reading the sequel. Let's talk about Ground Zero, because this whole sequence was fucked and heartbreaking and also really cool. So this is where this event, this night, gets referenced throughout the whole book. And it's the night that something happens to Alex and she ends up in the hospital, and everybody she's lived with and around at the time is found dead. And this is actually when the society Lethe takes her in. So we later
is it pronounced Lethe?
Yeah. What did you?
I was always saying it like Lethe.
It's funny because I was like started reading more than I'm listening to audiobooks, and like that's my main thing is being like, am I saying? Because like I'm looking through this book just briefly, like the physical copy, and I was like, there's no way I would have pronounced Salome as Salome. I would have said Salami or like Salem or like.
I was always like Lethe house, Lethe house.
Yeah, I think Lethe is a reference to some sort of river in Greece or Egypt. I don't know. Makes sense. I can't remember. They bring it up in the book. But yeah, so this is like the first time Alex takes a ghost or a gray into herself and uses their power. To avoid sort of the harder aspects of this recounting, essentially Alex decides not to be a part of this party with this one guy who's, you know, off the rails and dangerous. But her best friend and, partner in crime, sort of Helly, who's had her back, she goes because one of them has to be there, I guess. Or that's how Helly felt. And she goes and she ends up overdosing. But before she dies, she lays down on the bed next to Alex, and then they fall asleep. And then when they wake up, Alex is like, "Hey, get out of bed." And then goes to touch, and this is like devastating. Goes to touch Helly, and her hand goes through her, and that's at that point she realizes that Helly's no longer, and she's looking at the ghost version of Helly. And for me, that was just like that. Like I remember like listening to it and being like, no, 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 no. It's so sad. And then obviously she takes Helly's ghost into herself and wreaks havoc on all the men upstairs who have caused this sort of thing to happen. What were your thoughts on finding out what led to the story sort of beginning?
I think I had part of this sort of spoiled, I think.
Okay.
I had the fact that Helly dies spoiled pretty early. I don't even remember where I read. I think I might have just accidentally, I was like looking up a review or something for it, and like I read it on like Wikipedia and like one of those like Google synopsis things.
I think she even like references Helly though as being dead. Like even in the scene in the Borderlands, I think like, oh, what will she see? Will it be Helly or the other? I can't remember what her ex-boyfriend's name is, but that loser.
Len or something.
Yeah.
Like, but her taking the gray into her, like I thought that was like super, super cool. And the fact that like she, like how it was set up where she committed the whole crime, then like through the ghost, she like washes her off to like give her a clean alibi. Like she does it left-handed like Helly was instead of like right-handed like she is.
Right.
Like all these steps taken to like exact her revenge, and then like I felt like I gave like a whole different layer to the character, being like, especially when we meet her at the start where she's all like, oh, I don't know what happened. Like,
yeah, like timid and very much like, traumatized by what happened, but still like, cagey wouldn't be the right word in this context, but like, there's a point before we find out what happens where Darlington sort of stumbles on what actually occurred that night. And she's sort of relieved when he disappears because she's like, if people know what actually happened, I'll be fucked.
I thought it was just like an example of how well the character work was done, like peeling the layers back slowly, like revealing who the characters are, and just like a really cool use of the magic system, like revealing the powers like that.
Yeah.
Obviously like a very heavy scene, but like, again, it's that balance between, which happens a few times in the book, like of like the horrible things that happen and the cathartic sort of revenge, which does not happen very often in our world.
Right.
Unfortunately.
Right.
But yeah, it was like probably one of the most shocking moments of the book, like amongst many. But
yeah, it was the one for me that like sort of before the end of the book sort of put everything in a bow, where I was like, oh, all of this makes sense now. And just a tragic, again, going to like the tragic nature of this character, that like everything has gone wrong where it could have for her. And this was sort of one of the moments where she finally sort of fights back against it. And then it ends so brutally that like you can see why she's hesitant to do that again until it becomes like absolutely necessary. So I'm very curious to see, like, as she learns how to control this power, or feels the need to use it more often if the circumstances change, what that might look like and how powerful she can actually be.
And like will that lead her down a similar path of what's her face, Bellmom, yeah,
or Daisy. There was one part you said, you mentioned like when you heard like George Washington and stuff, or not George Washington, George W. Bush was part of you know there's parts where you're like, okay. And for me, and again, I think this is excellently written, but there were some parts to me that, like, I don't know, maybe it's because I'm just like a little bit older than the main character. I was like, oh man, that's cringe as fuck. Like, there's some parts where like, and I know the author is Israeli and Jewish, and this main character is Latina and from California. So there was parts where I was like, I would, I'd be curious to see how the representation felt for people who come from the same demographic. For me, I thought it was really cool and interesting, but I don't come from that demographic, so it's not really for me to say. But there are parts, I'm getting a little sidetracked. One of the parts of this book that I had to write it down as soon as I read it or heard it, because I was like, man, that was so cringy, was in reference to like a cashmere sweater. They were talking like somebody had cashmere, but Alex also had cashmere on, but the other person's cashmere was Kush. Alex's sweater was seeds and stems. And I was like, no, man, that ain't it at all. But I don't know. If I was a younger me, I would probably be like, oh, sick, dude. That was a sick analogy. But it just, when I read it, I was like, oh man, come on.
I think, though there was a few lines that were a bit when you read them and then you find out that she was originally like a YA author, you're like, all right, like I can see that. I can see.
They feel like almost like too edgy, like being a young adult and being like, I'm an adult. I say fuck, Yeah, it's like
there was another, I don't remember which interaction it was, but there was one where it was like actually a character swearing, and I was like, it just felt so forced. Like it just felt a bit too much, and I was like this doesn't feel like, this feels like somebody trying to write realistic dialogue, but like nobody would really say this.
That's how I felt about the Kush and stems part. I was like, I don't know, people don't talk like that. I'd be curious to see like I'm not that much older than this character, but like I think it would more resonate with people who are a little bit younger. Mm-hmm. But then again, some of the subject matter is super serious, and I don't know if I would recommend this book to like a young adult audience. I don't think
either.
So it's just those funny things where you're like, oh, okay. Mm-hmm. I also love the detective character, and sort of the setup that relates to the Divine Comedy, like with Dante and Virgil, all that sort of in-universe jargon and stuff I thought was really neat. All in all, I think I would stamp this, at least in the written aspect. This book is written with the Lords of Lore Masterclass on my
Definitely,
end.
yeah. This is very, very well written. Like, no question. Like, literally, the points that I am nitpicking are like just pure personal preference. Like,
absolutely.
Objectively, this is excellent writing, character work, like even world building. Like everything is done very, very well. Like it's a purely like, personally, I love high fantasy. I love crazy magic. I love weird races like that. That's where I live. So like it's a purely personal thing. But this is very well. In fact, like the parts that did dive into the magic were also really well done. Like I love alchemy. Like that's so cool. Like making potions. Like portals with mushrooms. Like it just like it's awesome. I love it.
So double thumbs up from me. And again, I wouldn't have recommended this to people because I do think it's that like a gentle step into the world of fantasy.
Exactly.
But also like tough to read because there's some serious things going on.
In terms of subject matter, it's tough, but a lot of people want that, like even in like just a fiction book or a nonfiction book, they want like themes that are very realistic. And then this just has such a low barrier of fantasy. Like this is like the perfect gateway book, like to get you into the heavier stuff.
I think that might do it here, unless you have anything else to add to.
Nope, we covered pretty much everything.
Good to go. That'll do it here for our spoiler review. We have a main show every Tuesday. You can check out where we do a concept or a topic about fantasy and sci-fi. So come check that out. Lords of Lore on YouTube, Twitter, Lords of Lore Pod, Instagram, Lords of Lore, and TikTok, Lords of Lore. You can follow us on all those outlets. And we do an episode every Friday here while we either review a book, play some D&D, or interview somebody about their nerdy, not so guilty pleasure. Now, for Ruminations fans specifically, we're going to do something new here. Okay.
Ooh.
So there's 3 books. And the next month is my turn to choose. And there's 3 books I'm having a tough time deciding. So I'm going to roll a 6-sided die. 1 and 2 will be the first book, 3 and 4 the second, 5 and 6 the third. And so I don't even know what book we're reading next. Okay. Here's my 6-sided die. It's like a resin die with some cool things inside it that I got from Dakota Irish or something. I don't know. So here we go. I know the books in my head, so you don't have to worry about it. That's a 6. So next month we'll be reading The Pariah by Anthony Ryan.
Okay.
So,
Anthony Ryan, the writer of The Pilgrimage of Swords?
Correct.
Nice.
Did you get a chance to listen to that?
I haven't yet, but I it's on my list.
Okay, cool. Anthony Ryan's one of my favorite authors.
Nice.
Watchers of the podcast, listeners of the podcast will know I talk about Anthony Ryan and the Raven's Shadow and Raven's Blade all the time. So I'm very excited. This is a new universe standalone as this far, and the sequel just got announced.
Okay,
so
nice.
I'm very excited to start that one. But for now, that'll do it. I'm Matt.
I'm Luka.
And we are the Lords of Lore.